Now, Robert Tenbrook Stevens was Secretary of the Army. Bobby's investigating organized crimes involvement in the manufacturing of uniforms for the United States military. Now, and again, let's give you some background here. The Republicans, McCarthy and Nixon and others, were investigating communists, union sympathizers, right? Communists were considered union sympathizers, and they were friendly to the gangsters. All they were doing this for one reason, so the Rockefellers, for the titans of industry, Rockefeller and Carnegie and Ford and many others, could make exorbitant profits, which I'm sure they were kicking back to their favorite politicians. Now, the Democrats, on the other hand, were investigating gangsters who were trying to smash the unions, where the Democrats were building up the right of labor to strike and to protest and to organize. So they were going after the gangsters because the gangsters were the enemy of the working man. You understand the background I'm trying to get here? Where Nixon was, they were looking at communists, and Joe McCarthy, you're looking at communists, because communists were sympathizers to the union movement. The Democrats are looking at gangsters who are defending the Rockefeller right to make huge profits. Well, Robert Tenbrook Stevens, I told you, his ancestor, General Tenbrook Stevens, was the commander of Saratoga Battlefield. Okay, Tenbrook Stevens married Rensselaer, married Elizabeth Rensselaer. General Phil Schuyler married Katharina Rensselaer. Now, the Rensselaer owned 1 million acres of Manhattan real estate, all where now the Albany district is, where the Capital District is. Phil Schuyler's mother was of Van Cortlandt. They owned most of Westchester County from the river all the way to the Connecticut border. And these people over the centuries are married 25, 30 times. Easy, and I'm not even exaggerating. And also, General Abraham Tenbrook's brother-in-law was Phil Livingston, who signed the Declaration of Independence, written by family member Robert Livingston, a group of 4 or 5 who wrote the Declaration of Independence, which included Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. He never signed. Robert Livingston didn't sign the document. He only co-authored it. These are significant people in the power structure of this nation. Now, Michael Paine, who provided Oswald with a safe house on the eve of the Kennedy assassination, he is also a descendant of a signatory of the American Declaration of Independence. He's a direct descendant of Robert Treat Paine. So here you have 2 descendants of signatories to the American Declaration of Independence. You think this is all by chance? I don't think so. It's a power structure that eventually fell into the orbit of the Rockefellers. Getting back to Robert Tenbrook Stevens now. Now, he's Secretary of the Army, okay? Now, his father founded the J.P. Stevens Corporation, a very famous corporation in the manufacture of textiles. It was actually an oligarchy. It was basically old family-owned textile mills, some cases 100 years old, many of them up the Hudson River Valley, the Mohawk River Valley. They were merging these things into an oligarchy/monopoly, no different than John Rockefeller did when he formed Standard Oil. And I believe both men Rockefeller was in concert with J.P. Stevens in building this textile oligarchy. The Rockefellers are huge in textiles. We can go on and on and on, but I'll cut to the chase. You know why they're big in textiles? Because all their clothes are made out of petroleum, just about. Yeah, you see the point. Wherever you look, there's Rockefeller under our noses. Wherever we go, there's a Rockefeller under our nose. We just don't have to be in a car burning gas. No, it's everywhere. These people are involved in everything. Just check the name on your credit cards and your banks and stuff. Goes on and on and on. Well, Abraham, now Now, Bobby Kennedy talked about, this is page 6. I'm giving you what he wrote on page 6, paragraph 3 and 4. He talked about Albert Anastasia. He talked about some other Italian names. They mentioned Italians. Not all the gangsters in this country were Italians, but they're going to mention Italians because they're Irish Catholics. And but that's okay. I can move. I can move on from that. I got big enough. I'm big enough to move on from that. He mentioned the violence involved in the making of these uniforms and the transportation of these uniforms. Okay. Well, who's transporting the uniforms? It's the Teamsters. Jimmy Hoffa. So his investigation eventually totally focused on Jimmy Hoffa. A huge, I should say not totally, but a huge focus on Jimmy Hoffa. His book, The Enemy Within, was all about the corruption within the Teamsters. Now, Teamsters are, of course, pro-Republican because they're pro-gangster. That's why Teamsters endorse Republican candidates. I don't want to mention any names now. I don't need to bring up any names here. Election names going on here in 2024. I don't want to bring up any names now. Don't need to. But so here's Robert Ten Broeck Stevens, whose great-great-grandfather commanded the Battle of Saratoga. All right. His father founded the J.P. Stevens Corporation, which was making uniforms for the United States Army. Was this a conflict of interest? Well, that's sad. Now, J.P. Stevens had a friend who's been described as his best friend, who was also a central figure in the Army McCarthy drama. His name was Gerald David Shine. You might recognize the name. The Shine Theater chain. Well, they owned more than theaters. They owned, had a lot of real estate holdings. Hotels as well. They owned the Ambassador Hotel, where RFK was assassinated on the eve of winning a Democratic primary in California and another state. But it wasn't significant as California. That was major. Bobby Kennedy was basically racing to the White House. No doubt about it. That's why the Rockefellers gunned him down while using their MKUltra weaponized assassins. Sirhan. Well, he's part of it. I don't know the full story. See, they don't necessarily have to pull the trigger. Okay. But they're going to end up taking the blame. See, that's how the Rockefellers did it. That's what they did with Oswald. He didn't necessarily have to pull the trigger, but he's going to take the blame because they sheep dip him as a communist. They didn't do that to Sirhan. They just sheep dipped him as crazy. But they're weaponized. See, what happened was the reason the Rockefellers had to cover the truth about the JFK assassination was because they didn't. President Johnson, the original plot when the Rockefellers set up to kill JFK was to blame it on Castro and maybe even Moscow. Who knows what these guys? These Rockefellers are ruthless. And they were going to blame it on Castro as an excuse for the United States government or a cover story for the United States government could invade Cuba. But things didn't go as planned because Oswald got caught. The plan was that Jack Ruby and David Yarens, the same man connected with the murder of James Reagan, were going to take Oswald either to the border or into Mexico and assassinate him. So when they say American Mafia members, well, I don't know, Mafia. They were urban gangsters. And they weren't even Italian, they were Jews. If you read Bobby Kennedy's book, most of the names aren't even Italians, except for he mentioned Albert Anastasia, which he was dead by the time Bobby began his investigation. But what was going on, though? This is why the Rockefeller, this was the motive. Well, let me back up a minute here. I mentioned Gerald David Shine. Okay, his family owned the Ambassador Hotel where Bobby was killed. His best friend was Abraham Ten Broeck Stevens. Okay, now they're related to the Dulleses. Abraham Ten Broeck and Phil Schuyler, and they're related to the Dulleses through the Lansing family. Well, Robert Lansing, Secretary of State Robert Lansing, who was Secretary of State for Wilson. Of course, Wilson was a Rockefeller hand puppet. He is their uncle. Secretary of State Lansing, Robert Lansing, is the uncle to Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles, who was of the two the more significant brother because he ran the Carnegie Endowment. They're related. They're related to Alexander Hamilton. They're related to General Phil Schuyler. They're related to General Abraham Tenbrook. I told you a story through John Lansing back then. And they ran the Carnegie Endowment. And they covered up the Kennedy assassination. They were put in there as by the Rockefellers to cover up the truth. Because here's what happened. Johnson didn't want to start a war with Russia. First of all, Oswald got apprehended by the Dallas police. That was not part of the plan. Now they had to send in Ruby to execute Oswald because, see, Ruby came into the plan because he was part of the murder of James Reagan, and Bobby Kennedy was investigating the murder, opening up the case of James Reagan. You know, that case was opened. They opened that case. Well, originally, 2 witnesses were assassinated, and then they opened the case. The Kefauver Committee opened the case. Another witness was assassinated. Why? Well, these guys, most likely, based on allegations, based on the writing of Drew Pearson, a famous columnist at the time, who was very close to James Reagan, that the order came from Henry Crown, okay, supposedly head of the Chicago outfit, and one of the Annenbergs, maybe Moe, maybe could have been Moe Annenberg or Walter Annenberg. All ties to the race wire because the Annenbergs used to print the daily race. The Race Informer magazine, they sold them millions. Anybody who bet on horses bought that magazine. It goes on and on and on. But also people connected with the Hilton Hotel. Well, Henry Crown was part owner of the Hilton Hotel. He was part owner of the Flamingo. Well, who bought the Flamingo? The high Protestant Conrad Hilton bought the Flamingo. Okay. Conrad Hilton, the high Protestant elite, was buying up hotels that had rings and gangsters involved in the running of these hotels. And what these gangsters were doing, they were selling, well, during Prohibition, they were selling alcohol, bringing in alcohol. They were involved in gambling. They were involved in narcotics. And they were also majorly involved in prostitution. So who owns the hotels? The Astors, the Protestant elites. And they got these gangsters working out of their hotels, no different in Las Vegas, working out of these hotels, running emporiums of vice. No. These were. See, this is why they killed the Kennedys. Bobby was digging up, taking shovelfuls of dirt out of the Rockefellers' backyard. See, now this goes to the story of Joe Valachi. The reason we know about the murder of Joe the Boss Masseria, who was involved in that? Albert Anastasia, Joe Adonis, the labor enforcer for Rockefeller Center, Bugsy Siegel, let's call him the dean of, call him the founder of the Flamingo, which wasn't quite the founder, but we'll give him that credit. All right. They were all part of, how do we know about it? They were involved, and Charles Luciano, who went away for 50 years for pandering, which is prostitution. And they're working out of the Waldorf Astoria. And the Astors and the Vanna and the elite Protestants are benefiting from this. And look at the race wire, betting on horses. Who owns the horse races? Who owns the horses? The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Whitneys, the Belmonts. How many Italians own racetracks? How many Italians own horses? Who owns Saratoga? The Whitneys. Who owns the Belmont? The Whitneys are part of it. The Whitneys and the Belmonts are related. It's another vast story. It ties in with the Kennedy assassination, ties into the Rockefeller history. But I'm not going to go into it. It's a lot of genealogy.